Okay, so thank you for coming. I'm not going to be doing this presentation. It really is going to be Christian, but I just want to start briefly by telling you why we're doing this. If you remember at the business meeting, I said, you know, are there subjects you guys would like to cover? And somebody said something to the degree of, I'd like to be able to be in a basement, and somebody says, what's that? And be able to say, that's a sump pump, and you know, just what to expect in a home inspection. What are we looking for when we're showing a house? What are we looking for to just raise alarm bells in our own mind? And don't worry, we know we're not home inspectors. We know that we put ourselves at great risk if we try to do something we're not qualified to do. But at the same time, we want, if you've been to 100 home inspections, you can say, I'm not an inspector, but that doesn't look right. You know, so we want to know, what should we be looking for? We want to be able to tell a home inspector, hey, when you go, could you pay particular attention to the roof on the west side because something doesn't look right, right? So again, we don't want to be home inspectors, but we want to know how we can help you and help the buyer work together. So we do have an agenda. I'm only going to interject if I think somebody has a question or there's something that should be discussed further. Christian and I went through the agenda together many times beforehand, so he's going to follow it. And with no further ado, has everybody met Christian? Is it Plasencia?
Plasencia. Should I stand, sit? What's best here?
Whatever you feel comfortable.
I'll sit for now.
Whatever you feel comfortable
I'll sit
doing,
for now.
and I am going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you,
Thank
Lisa.
you.
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me today. This is going to be fun. So for those of you who know me, hello. For those of you who don't, my name is Christian. My company is Inspection Pro, and I'm based right here in Battle Creek. And I hope today that you guys can learn a little bit about home inspections, but really get a little bit of confidence when working with your buyer during the showings, and just be a little bit more familiar, okay? So just quickly about myself, my background. As a teenager, I started out remodeling basements out in Novi, Michigan. Then I moved on to build new construction homes, rehab a ton of older homes. And all along the while, I realized I love inspecting, and I just decided to leave everything else behind and just pursue home inspections because it's really what I love doing. It's my passion. So that's what brought me here today. And we've got a couple of really fun topics we're going to go through. So let's get started. Do you want to introduce the topics, Lisa?
No, you go right ahead. I'm just going to interject if I feel something's missing.
All right. So we've got a few visual aids here in your little packet, and those are going to come into play right now for the first topic, which is what are the most common defects that home inspectors find, and what do they mean? What do those defects mean? So the first item in your packet is going to be water in a basement. It's pretty common to find. And some people get kind of scared with it, but it's really 99.9 times out of 100, it's related to the gutters and the downspouts. I know it sounds kind of silly, but believe it or not, gutters and downspouts contribute to water in basement more times than anything else.
And if a second culprit would be, it would be grading.
Oh, that was going to be my fun question.
Okay,
you beat me to
sorry.
it. I love it. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Grading or the slope of the land is definitely number two. I mean, sometimes they work together. So if we can just keep the gutters clean and keep those downspouts extended away from the foundation, we're going to really, that's our best bet for keeping water out of the basement. So in other words, when you see some moisture or water in the basement, go right ahead and go look outside, because it's probably as simple as cleaning the gutters and adding longer downspout extensions. And in your illustration here, it kind of shows you what happens when that water builds up near the foundation. It permeates through. All right. Second item is efflorescence. This was one Lisa wanted me to talk about. Efflorescence, a fun word. Another item that can look kind of scary in the basement. You know, have you ever seen anyone like that white, powdery, crystallized substance on foundations? Sometimes it looks like a mold or a fungus, and it looks kind of scary. But efflorescence is plain and simple. It's basically salt deposits. It's crystallized salt that's left behind as that moisture permeates through the foundation. Totally harmless. Okay, so it looks, and it can be cleaned off really easily. So efflorescence, basically it's crystalline deposits of salt.
Can I make a couple comments?
Go for it.
One of the nice things about understanding this is there's a fine line between encouraging a buyer to ignore an issue, but giving some calmness, right? That is one of agents' biggest problems with home inspectors is they deliver the news and it's very scary and there's no, but this is common, right? So an agent can kind of give that calmness, right? So it's not to say, don't worry about that water, it's probably the downspouts. It's a way to say, this water is a concern. Good news is typically it's just downspouts or gutters, but this is something we'll want to focus on, right? So you're not negating that there could be an issue, but you're, by understanding that these things can be common, you're giving that calmness where they're freaking out. Okay,
Lisa,
sorry.
thank you so much. I think that's really important. You know, the goal here is not to make you guys home inspectors. It's just to give you the confidence of knowing what these defects are. And yeah, thank you so much. The next common item, now we're getting into my favorite things, and we're on page number 4 of the packet, is double tap circuit breakers. I love electric. I love the whole electric system. You guys that know me know that. So here's some great photos. Double tap circuit breakers. Sounds scary. It's just simply 2 wires attached to 1 breaker. 2 wires. We expect 1 wire per circuit breaker. So pretty simple to correct. It does sound kind of scary though. People sometimes get excited about the electric panel. Anybody ever ran into a double tap breaker on a home inspection? I had a feeling. I know you guys have.
You did.
Yeah.
You did and told us, yeah.
I thought so. All right. The next item, very common, also one of my top faves, overfused circuit breakers. Just a fancy word that means we have a higher amp circuit breaker than the wires rated for. And here's what it means in the real world. We typically see a 20 amp circuit breaker, but the wire attached to it's only rated for 15 amps. So we should just see a 15 amp breaker there, okay? Breakers are like $15 a piece. It takes me longer to take the cover off the panel than to swap out a breaker. That's how simple it is. Now, I'm not saying it's not important. It's just, I like it when it's important, but easy and cheap.
It's actually super common too. And the reason it's common is because they're so easy to switch out. People do it themselves. And I'm married to a guy, if 15 is great, 20 is better, you know, so it's just.
Why not?
Yeah. So again, not a huge deal, very common, easy to fix, but important.
And on your little packet, I show you on the top left, the amp rating for each size wire, not because I think you guys are going to be electrical experts, but it kind of helps show that 15 amp wire is definitely thinner than the 20 amp wire. And that's why we don't want to mismatch the amp rating of the circuit breaker with the amp rating of the wire.
What will it do?
Great question. So imagine we've got a circuit breaker that was up, so it should be 15, it was up to 20 or 30. And let's just pretend it goes to a plug socket. And in the winter, on that plug socket, we plug in a really high amp or high watt electric heater. We really draw way too much power, more than that wire is rated for. That breaker probably won't trip fast enough before the wire in the wall is damaged, or it can cause some unsafe conditions, like it could heat up. And under the worst case scenario, it could cause an electric fire. Okay. So that's why we don't want to overfuse. We want that breaker to trip on time. I'm so glad you asked that though. All right. And Lisa's right. Those last 2 items, double taps and overfused circuit breakers, I find on about 50% of the panels I inspect. So it's very common. Okay. Any other questions about the circuit breakers?
Yeah, how do you know the gauge of the wires? I mean, like if the home buyer says, yeah, I'm just gonna get to that. Okay, well, you can see the gauge of the wire.
So
Is it on there, on the wire?
yeah, it will be. On the second photo, you see the orange PVC jacket. That will have a label eventually somewhere down the wire. Home inspectors, we just recognize the size of the copper conductor. We can eyeball it and we're so used to it. But for a home buyer or for a homeowner, you would look at that jacket for the stamped label, and you sometimes have to trace it back 3 or 4 feet before you reach the label. and it'll say 12, 14, 10, it'll go right on down there. Good question. Now in a report, your inspector is going to tell you which circuit breaker it is, so you don't have to hunt it up.
So if the buyer decided it's not a big enough worry to make the seller fix it, but I'm gonna take care of it later, they could literally give their electrical contractor a copy of the report and they'd see right what it is.
And if it's an electronic report, you can just screenshot that one little item and text it over to your electrician.
Sorry.
Oh, good,
Still a
good.
little old school.
All right, guys. Our next super common item here in Battle Creek, you guys know a lot of our homes are built in the 50s and 60s. They probably started out with 2-prong outlets, but a common item is a non-grounded 3-prong outlet or 3-prong receptacle. Yep, see, Dave's seen this before. It's very common. It's almost unusual not to find 1 or 2 of these in a home. So it's also very easy to correct. So I'm not saying it's not important, but it's very simple to correct. And I don't really, I mean, I'd be happy to go through the corrections with you, but I know you guys aren't trained to be electricians, but I just think this is a common item. So nothing to get too excited about, in my opinion. All right, so those are the common defects I wanted to talk about, but there's one more that's not pictured. And this one's going to sound kind of silly, but it's a furnace filter that's way too dirty or way too clogged. And I'm mentioning this because it can actually make it look as if the furnace is problematic or the air conditioner is problematic. So imagine your furnace, you've got all that air coming through the return air, passing through the filter into the furnace, and then getting heated up and going out through your house. If that filter is old and really clogged, it really slows that air movement down. And then the air it heats up too much. It doesn't move fast enough to bring the heat out. So the furnace overheats and shuts down in short cycles. And it looks like there's a problem with the furnace. Well, really, it's just the furnace filter. And it can do the same thing for the air conditioning system. That really slow moving air can move so slow that the air conditioner coil inside the furnace freezes up or ices up. Now it looks like, wow, there's a problem with the central air unit. You know, maybe the refrigeration pressures or this. No, it's the, you know, a lot of times it's the filter. So just be mindful of that, okay? And I just wanted to mention that one. I think that's a fun, unusual one. All right, so those are some common defects. Any questions or any other common defects that anyone wants to add? All right, our next item is what's covered by a typical home inspection. So I like to break the house down into 5 major systems. So that's going to be the roof and the exterior, the foundation and structure. That's going to include the foundation, the floor structure, the roof structure in the attic, along with the insulation. Then we have the heating and cooling system. So of course, that's your furnace, air conditioner, and performance and age and so forth. Then the plumbing system. So that's water supply pipes, drain pipes, plumbing fixtures, you know, water heater, of course. And then last, and my absolute favorite, the electric system. So of course, that's the electric panel, the plug sockets or receptacles, light fixtures, and just the general wiring methods. You know, what type of wires do you have installed at the house? We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So those are the 5 major systems. Then we typically will also circle around and hit some general miscellaneous items. So kitchen appliances, countertops, cabinets, bathrooms, floors, ceilings, walls, and windows, and the garage, you know, the main garage for parking. So now the outbuilding, not the big old pole barn or workshop, but typically it's the garage we use for parking. So those are the things that are typically included in the home inspection from my perspective. And of course, there are some add-ons or some other items we can add. In our area, radon testing is a really common item to add. Anyone here had their own home tested for radon ever? Okay, good, good. Glad to hear it. Do you remember what the results were by any chance? That's okay. Don't worry about it. That's a good thing if you don't remember. If they were bad, you'd probably remember.
Not enough to mitigate, let's just put it that
Yeah.
way, yeah.
After a certain year, like with houses being built, weren't they just automatically, so.
High five.
Yeah.
So yes, after 2004, Michigan Building Code or Residential Code required passive radon mitigation systems to be installed with new construction homes. So that's just basically the radon tube, the piping. That's not the blower. That's what they call a passive system. So it could still have higher radon, but now all you got to do is add the blower. So very good question. And radon is really common. Calhoun County, many of you may already know this, we're a red zone on the EPA's map. So we have the high potential for high radon. It does not mean every home is going to have high radon, but we have a much higher potential for high radon than other parts of the country, okay? Any questions about radon?
What is it?
So good question, I guess. It's an odorless, colorless, tasteless, radioactive gas.
That
And-
naturally happens as the
Like
earth.
comes up or something.
As the earth
Mhm.
It's naturally
Yeah,
occurring in the
just
ground. It naturally occurs in
Comes
the
up
air.
as the earth.
And it causes lung cancer. Okay, so it's the #2 cause of lung cancer in the US. Now, when we build these homes, we dig basements, we seal them up to make them energy efficient. Well, we tend to trap the radon inside the house and it builds higher concentrations. So where the outdoor concentrations are quite low and it's naturally occurring, in some homes it becomes quite high and it becomes a risk for lung cancer. Okay, but it's pretty easy to mitigate. Yeah.
So when you were saying after 2004, newer construction homes, that piping was added, I was actually in the house the other day where that was in there. But you said that the blower system is like, they'd have to add that in order to actually use that system that's built in it.
Ooh, really
Is
good
that-
question.
Am I understanding that right?
Yeah,
Or-
absolutely.
Okay.
So you can tell, imagine this is that pipe in the basement.
Mhm.
And this is the passive radon system. You would normally see a gauge in here, a pressure gauge. It's usually a blue liquid in a little tube,
Mhm.
and that will tell you that the blower is installed and working. If you don't see that pressure gauge, there's probably not a blower installed, it's just a passive system.
Gotcha.
So just because they can install a passive system doesn't mean they don't just go ahead and install the system. And, so you shouldn't assume because you see it that it's active, but you shouldn't assume that because they didn't have to put it active, that it's not active.
Right,
Okay.
And we also don't want to assume that all homes built after 2004 have the passive system.
right.
Some municipalities didn't catch on, they didn't inspect for it, they didn't
Mhm.
require it. So it doesn't mean every home's going to have it just because
Right.
we're supposed to.
I'm trying to
have it.
think back to that house. That house had that piping because even
Mhm.
the buyer was like, oh, that's like, was reading because it said it down the side,
Yeah.
right or whatever. It was like, oh, that's interesting that that's there. I've never seen that just there, but I don't recall seeing the gauge and all of that stuff.
So if you don't see that gauge, it's
Mhm.
probably just a passive
Right.
system.
And what's the passive system actually do?
It
Gives an
passively, it
escape.
just basically
It
allows
just
air
gives
to
an
naturally
escape,
move
yeah.
through there.
Okay. So
But
it
here's
just
the-
doesn't have that
Draw it,
Yeah.
it just allows it.
sucker.
It doesn't have the sucker or
Yeah,
blower.
yeah.
But here's the interesting part. Radon gas is a very dense gas. It tends to sink down to the lowest levels of the home. So it doesn't naturally lend itself to escaping through a passive tube anywhere near as well as if you had a blower on it, okay?
Mhm.
So that tube it probably will help, but I think the blower is gonna make an immense difference. And they're very, very effective with the blowers.
And cheap.
And they're inexpensive, exactly. All right, so great question. Thanks for asking that about the radon. Any other questions about radon?
Should we suggest that they get tested every so often, or?
Um,
So say that you buy the house and you didn't have it inspected for radon. Should I recommend like maybe 5 years down the line, you should get it?
The inspector's report will probably have recommendations in there if it was maybe borderline or on the cusp. But radon testing, the results will fluctuate based on the season, based on pressure outside and things like that. So the EPA typically does recommend testing at various times of the year, but in all reality, when we do radon testing, we're supposed to cause the conditions in the home to give us our highest results. So close it up, close all the windows, keep all the exterior doors closed. So we typically expect to see the very highest radon results during the test period. Normal day-to-day living, we expect the radon results to usually be lower because we're opening up and we're exchanging more air.
What's safe levels?
There's really no such thing as safe radon levels, but there is sort of. So there's a threshold that the EPA sets, and that is 4.0 picocuries per liter of air, or 4.0 units per liter of air. Anything at 4.0 or higher, the EPA recommends installing a mitigation system. Anything between like 2 units and 4 units per liter, they say, consider installing a system. And then below 2.0, they don't recommend any action. Okay.
So for what it's worth,
4
agents
point-
know this. If you get a system that tests below 4, it is harder to convince a seller to put in a system, then it might be the buyer has to decide.
I
Do
think
you want to put in a system?
I would agree completely. I
Yeah.
think below 4.0, I would maybe consider that an upgrade.
Yeah.
rather than a repair. At 4.0 higher, then it would be a failed test and it would be probably a repair. Does that make sense? Yes.
Can I ask you one comment? I recently had a buyer, their level was like 9, and we asked the seller to pay for a system. It was about $1,350. So it's kind of like the price range.
Which is crazy because that's
I've
when I
seen
had,
750.
yeah,
Yeah.
when I
Mine was
first
800.
started, it was like right around $700. The last one we had installed in the house was $950 last year. In my house in Brenda.
But your
It
house,
was
might-
Tuesday.
yeah, I don't, there might be
And
mitigating
difficulty,
circumstances, yeah.
I do not install the systems. That helps protect the integrity of my inspections. That way there's not a conflict of interest. All right. The next item that's considered sometimes an add-on is pest inspections or wood destroying insect inspections. You guys know, especially with VA financing, because that's going to be a requirement. So for my inspections, that's just included as part of the structure inspection. So I'm already inspecting the floor structure for damage or wood destroying insects. So there's no charge for that. But for some inspectors, it's a separate service. So it's a good idea to know that when you hire the inspector and or ask about it.
Christian, VA also requires that the seller pay for the pest
Very good.
inspection. Do you have a method where you can split that out?
Yeah.
And okay, good.
So then in that case, I would I have to charge a fee to the seller and the seller has to have a receipt to pay.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would charge the seller for that.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
And fill out that special form.
Thank you.
Good point. All right, so those are the typical components covered by a home inspection. Any questions about areas that might or might not be covered by the inspection? All right. Our next topic is, what are the biggest ticket items in a house? Now, there are tremendous number of expensive items that could go on in a house. So I'm going to focus on the ones that we just see more often, okay, for the home inspection.
And when I say this, what I really think about is the deal killers. So what I used to do is the home inspector's there for about an hour and a half. I'd try to beat the buyers there and I'd say to the home inspector, you know, "Have we got any big ones? You know, I want to know right off the bat, is there something big, right? So, you know,
Mhm.
if the roof's shot or the structure's bad, or, you know, what would be those big ticket items that right off the bat, we've got a problem.
So I always reflect on those 5 major systems.
Mhm.
So that's roof, foundation and structure, heating, cooling, plumbing, and electric. Anybody had to pay for a roof recently or on one of their deals? How much it might cost? So we typically see between 8,000, sometimes up to 20,000 if it's a complex roof. So are you hoping to talk about prices or just those
No, I'm
items?
just, what are the biggies?
Yep. So it's those 5 major items: roof, foundation, heating, cooling, plumbing, electric. One of the items that in the electric that is, we're gonna talk about at the very end, is knob and tube wiring and some reasons why people might shy away from that and some, maybe some stigma around it, okay?
And how to recognize it.
Yeah, well,
Thank
we've
you.
got some good photos of that
Good.
later on. All right, guys, any other questions about the big ticket items? We covered that pretty well earlier. All right, now these topics, Lisa, I love that you asked.
Okay,
What are the top things, or I guess it's the next one, sorry.
Yeah, I
So
know.
This one is, what are the top things agents should look for to direct a buyer to get an inspection, especially when the buyers maybe consider waiving the inspection? So first of all, you're breaking my heart. Of course, I'm a little biased on the home inspector, but I really do believe every buyer should really strongly consider the home inspection.
well, Christian, for what it's worth, agents are trained to never, ever recommend they don't. Because that just then puts the liability back on us. So if a buyer waives an inspection, it's not because the agent led them to do so.
You're making my heart whole again.
Okay.
At least not here.
Yeah. Our agents are. fine.
I've only written a few offers where it was waived and it was never like, yeah, you should definitely waive it. I was like,
Yeah.
no, you should absolutely get a home inspection. And like,
Yeah.
well.
We don't
you
want
know,
to. Yeah.
You don't want,
Yeah.
okay.
I truly understand. I know that you guys want your buyers to be happy with their home, and that includes having an inspection.
Well, and what
Hey,
we
it's a
don't
competitive
want
market,
is 2
though.
years from now, you're suing me because I told you not to get one.
Or they're just
Right.
upset with you and they don't use you for their
Right.
next sale, you know?
Right.
So I understand that, but this is almost a trick question for me, so I'm gonna do my best to answer it. Here are some things you guys can keep your eye out for. And it's, again, those big ticket items we talked about. You guys know the roof it's hard for you guys to really see things on the roof. From the ground, compared to the ladder, compared to walking on the roof, the view is vastly different. Believe it or not, from the ground, and when I get up there, it's like, wow, I would not have expected this sometimes, okay? Then the foundation. Here are some, go for
Let's
it.
go back, but a couple of things if you see on the roof automatically, right? Curling.
Curling.
So if the shingles are curling up, that is right. Waving in the roof. If the roof, if you see wave, and again, I know those are like if it's that bad on the ground, it's bad. So if it's that bad on the ground, right? Yeah.
Here's 2 more cheats for that.
Okay.
Thank you. So if you're looking around, if you're walking around the exterior and you see little chunks of shingles on the ground, so not necessarily the granules, but actually chunks that are maybe a few, like 5 or 10 granules put together.
Yeah.
That can be deteriorated shingles,
Yeah.
and they'll fall on the ground right along the gutter line.
Yeah.
And then inside the house, you guys know water stains.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys have your eye out for that anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are a couple of good cheats. Yeah, right. The next item, let's talk about foundations and cracks, okay? This is just a few helpful cheat hints so that you guys know what you're looking for. So with the foundation system, especially with poured concrete, we're going to expect to see vertical cracks. Very common, they typically occur during the curing process, not necessarily a sign of a structural problem. So the vertical cracks that are fine cracks in a poured concrete, those are not the things we're looking for. What we are looking for, though, are horizontal cracks. That's a sign. Imagine this is the foundation wall. That's a sign of bowing inwards, and it typically will crack horizontally as it bows inwards. So look for horizontal cracks. Look for cracks that are uneven from one side of the crack to the other. So imagine if one side of the crack is further forward or backwards compared to the other side of the crack. That's a sign of some concerning movement. One side of the crack is shifting upwards or downwards compared to the other side of the crack. Or if you have this really strong pronounced V shape, as if one side of the crack is shifting down and not supported properly. So those are some helpful cheats for foundations, what you could look for, okay?
What about with brick foundations? Like I see a lot in the brick foundations,
Yeah.
you know, like the middle. I know it's
The
not
joint.
grout.
Yeah,
Needs
you
to be
got it.
But,
pointed.
Or something.
Yeah, like I see a lot of cracks in those.
Good question. So she's asking about the cracks inside the mortar joints on like a masonry block foundation. So we will sometimes see stair step cracks along the joints. This is a harder one for a non-trained person to identify because we do oftentimes see cracks along the joints that just need tuck pointing, which I heard somebody mention. Very common remedy for that. It's almost like a maintenance thing. But if those cracks form some specific patterns like an X pattern, that's a sign of bowing inwards on a foundation wall. So it's not as easy to identify without further investigation. So the cracks are a good thing to notice, but it's harder to assess those unless you've got a little bit of experience. But I guess a good thing to look for is an X pattern, but it's just not as easy to identify. But great question.
What about, like when you're in a basement and the walls are like wet, is that a foundation thing or is that just?
Yep, that's one of the things we talked about earlier. That's usually, wet is usually a result of the gutters, the downspouts, and sometimes the grading. And because foundations are concrete, they're porous. Water will permeate through the porous concrete always, okay? So our goal is to get that water away from the foundation. And so
And sometimes depending on the basement, sometimes just sweat.
humidity.
Sometimes just humidity, yes.
I did an inspection yesterday, no central air conditioning, vacant house. There was sweat on every cold water pipe in the whole basement.
Yeah.
I could feel the humidity in the house.
Yeah.
So that's just a fact of life living in Michigan. If you're not running your air, if it's a vacant house, they just sometimes turn the thermostat off. So good question. But I think the moisture on the foundation, probably a sign of something other than a foundation problem, but it can cause foundation problems. So then you can see that cracking sometimes. All right. Great questions. Any other foundation questions? So another couple of the things we can look for are furnaces, just for their overall age and appearance. Kind of a rule of thumb for a furnace. The bigger it is, the older it is. That's the general rule. Okay, there are exceptions. You guys know what an old furnace looks like. So that's something you just keep your eye out for. And then knob and tube wiring. We talk about this a lot. Flip to your last page. Let's look at it finally. Last page of your packet. Knob and tube wiring. So knobs and tubes are shown in the first photo. The tall, fatter, round knob at the bottom of that first photo, that's the knob part.
And
And then
it's ceramic,
it's
correct?
usually ceramic, it's usually white. And then those tubes, those 3 tubes at the top are usually a grayish color. Sometimes they really discolor badly over time. They're not ceramic, they're usually a weird fibrous material. So this is knob and tube wiring on all 3 photos. You'll probably see it in the second photo on the right. That's inside of an attic space. You might not be in the attic, so you'll probably see it more so in the basement like the bottom photo. Okay, so this is knob and tube wiring. Here's just a little snippet about knob and tube wiring. Knob and tube wires are older. The insulators tend to be brittle. That doesn't mean they're defective just because it's there. But the knob and tube wiring relies on the open air around it to dissipate heat. So if we cover it or insulate over it, we cause a problem. So just because the knob and tube is present isn't necessarily a defect in and of itself. But if it's insulated over, then it can be problematic, okay? Or if it's disturbed badly, because it's so brittle, we can break off the insulators. So a good rule of thumb, never ever insulate over knob and tube wiring because it can overheat and cause fire risk.
So some underwriters will nix knob and tube out of hand for FHA or VA loans. It's just, some underwriters are knob and tubes a no. Some underwriters
gonna
are knob and tube is a no unless you can get an electrician to say everything's good here. It's not an automatic death, but it's a pretty automatic death for FHA or VA loans if there's knob and tube wiring.
Yeah.
That's good feedback for an inspector because I don't get to see the deal after I'm done with the inspection. So that's good for me to hear.
Is that related to like the fuse panel box, or is that a separate system issue?
It's related to it for sure,
Okay.
because oftentimes it will connect into the electric panel or fuse box, but sometimes they upgrade portions in the fuse box, but they don't always eliminate all the knob and tube elsewhere, especially like in the attic or inside the walls. We can't see in the walls.
Am I thinking of the fuses that are the circle
Yep.
glass fuses? Okay.
So very rare occasions, we're gonna see some fuse boxes that actually use those round, twist-in fuses. And that is oftentimes when you have the older wiring too. Does that answer your question? All right, Lacey, good question.
So what I would often say to a buyer is, okay, you've got an old fuse box, you've got knob and tube wiring. In and of itself, that really doesn't mean this is a bad situation. It could all work, it all worked. The number one problem is if you're FHA or VA, your lender may not require it. The second problem is there's no air conditioning here because this kind of box can't support air conditioning. And at some point, someone's gonna have to rewire this house, right? So it's just old. And because it's so old, it could be potentially dangerous.
Very well said.
How much does something like that?
What's it cost to rewire a 1,200 square foot range?
I think you're into the thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
I've never had to hire that out, so I don't have any personal experience, but it's a
We-
lot of labor.
used to be 1,500, so I guess it's gonna be
Okay.
2 or 25 at this point.
We had to redo ours on our old house and it was built in like 1880 and it was Michigan basement level and then upstairs and it was 7,500 to do the
Okay.
entire house.
There you go.
And they took it all out. It was all knob and tube.
I had a VA buyer who was interested in a house that had knob and tube and we had to walk away because that
Yeah.
under.
I think that was it was just shy of 1,500 square feet.
Wow.
The house was.
And as a seller's agent, when you're going to list a house that you see knob and tube, now you know to tell them,
Probably not gonna do.
This in the
VA
wet
or
basement?
FHA.
Good point.
We are
What offers are you not gonna think about?
Yeah,
That's right.
you're eliminating a lot of your buyers by having this type of wiring.
I have one more red flag that's more common nowadays, becoming more and more common that you can look out for. Indoor gardening. Does anybody know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Grow operations.
No.
Now, can anyone give me an example of why that might be a red flag or what problem that might cause?
There's all
Humidity.
sort, yeah.
Humidity, good one.
All sorts of electrical
Electrical.
situations
That's the
happening.
big one for me. So
Yes.
humidity is definitely important because that can cause other things like the M words, mold or mildew that I try not to use often. So spore-like substances, but electrical. This equipment for growing indoor plants usually demands more of the electrical system than what that electrical system was designed for. Unless they installed some specialized dedicated circuits, they are probably overloading those circuits. We don't always see the problems caused by overloading circuits because the problems are usually in the wiring in the wall or inside the receptacle if you take it apart. So those are the reasons why I would consider indoor gardening a red flag. Not necessarily a problem, but something that should be looked at closely, okay? When you open up the electric panel, sometimes you'll see the wires attached to the breakers are scorched. The insulation on the wire melted because they've overloaded that circuit so badly, okay? So that's my little spiel about indoor gardening. All right? So I hope that's some helpful tips about things you can look out for to help
Thank you.
maybe talk about not waiving the inspection and not breaking my heart. Any other topics that you think might be included on that list?
No, I liked it. Thank you.
All right.
I kind of did have one.
Go for
about
it.
Mold in an attic.
So that's another good one. You won't usually have your head in the attic as an agent. So that's a great red flag that you'll probably never see. But that is also a really good item for the home inspector to catch.
Like easy to remediate.
I think fairly
Costly,
easy. There's
though.
companies that'll do it. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, so mold is moisture, correct? Most often, mold is moisture. Mold is the result of moisture.
Absolutely.
The last time I saw mold in an attic is because the seller, without knowing they were doing something wrong, when they insulated the attic, covered the vents. And so then, you know, now you're not letting any of the air escape and you're trapping moisture in there. And would I be right to say that mold is killed by bleach, so to speak? right?
99.9% of the time.
Yeah.
I would high five you if I could reach you. I'm a high fiver. So definitely. Thank you, Whittier.
So I think it's the same
conduit.
thing with
Yeah.
moisture in the basement. Moisture in and of itself is not a huge issue. It can't be allowed to continue. Right? That's the thing. Moisture, yep, there's moisture. It needs to be stopped. So it just all depends on where the moisture is coming from and can the moisture be corrected? And that, like if you talk to a mold expert, like once mold's out of the bag, now you've got some big problems. You've got the hazmat suits and da 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 da.
Right.
So I'm gonna
So I
wait
don't.
till I'm off the record. to
Yeah.
talk.
I don't ever use the word mold on my inspections. I always use spore-like substances because we don't know if it's actually mold until we send it to a lab.
Yes.
So I don't use the
right.
M word. But to answer your question about is it easy to remediate? Yes and no. Yes, you can call a company like Bale Tech or ServPro. They love going in attics and remediating. Last time I called Bale Tech, it was about $3,000, and this was for a duplex. So not a drop in the bucket, but not. I mean, if that's what it takes to sell a home, hey, sometimes you got to make those tough choices as a seller.
But
That's
as
your
a
guys'
listing
round.
agent,
That's your
you
round.
catch that stuff before the home inspection. You have them get somebody to advise them, somebody who knows what they're talking about, of how to stop the moisture, how to remove the spore-like substances that are there, and move on.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned the insulation in the attic, adding that and covering the vents.
Yeah.
All right, guys, you ready for our next topic? These are the ones I'm really glad you asked about, Lisa.
Good.
So the next one is, what do I wish more agents would do or would say? And agents are actually really good overall at preparing their buyers for the inspection. Buyers sort of know what's coming. But the number one thing I would ask more agents did was prepare your sellers for the home inspection. Now, granted, my view is skewed towards just the home inspection. So really try to help prepare your sellers. I'm going to have to create a little cheat sheet because I send this off on every showing time appointment I schedule, and it has these exact same words. Basically lets agents know I cannot move personal property. You know, I can't move their furniture out of the way or their beautiful china cabinet so that I can get to the electric panel. So we want to clear items all the way around the furnace, all the way around the water heater, all the way around the electric panel, and the one that we always forget, the attic access point. So let's break it down. The furnace, you guys know, I've got to open up that furnace, remove the covers. I got to be able to get to it to do that. You know, if they have totes stacked up in their basement, which we do, you know, it's a tough call. Should I move personal property or not? You know, because then I become a liability issue for the home inspector. So it's best to get that out of the way. Same thing for the water heater, but especially the electric panel. Not only do I have to remove the cover on the panel, I have to do that safely. Imagine trying to lean over all these items so I can undo the screws in the panel. And then I got to try to put it back without shocking myself and killing myself. So we want to try to be a little bit safer about that. So let's just clear that up for those guys like me.
That's such great advice. Thank you.
And then the attic access point, the one we all forget, and I'm guilty of it too. It's usually overhead. I usually have to bring my own ladder to set up. But if it's in a closet that's filled with personal items, I just can't get to it. In which case I'll have to exclude it from the inspection. And I don't like doing that. I want to do my best work, but I also don't want to leave anything uncertain for the buyer. I want that buyer to be certain and comfortable and happy. So if we can prepare our sellers for that, I would love it. And I should create a nice little cheat sheet. Should have been in this packet, but maybe they'll be coming soon. Second thing, this just happened this week again. I drove all the way out to Niles, Michigan for an inspection for one of my favorite, for a great agent. And, kidding guys, I got there and the outbuilding was locked. And there's no key in the key box. And the listing agent lives 3 hours away, doesn't know anything about it. So try to make sure that I have access to the outbuildings. So either leave it in the lockbox or center box, put it on the kitchen countertop with a little note, hey, Mr. Inspector, this is the key for such and such. Because I want to do my best work, and like all inspectors, I want to get in there so I can put the buyer's mind at ease.
So guys, Christian, this is easy. A listing agent should have a form you send to the seller before the inspection. Here are the things to have to be sure you're ready for the, I mean, that if I were still selling, I'd be writing a note now, right now, because I didn't do that and I should have. Something to give sellers to prepare them for the home inspection.
I actually have this written out in text format.
Could you?
I'll convert it over to like a little postcard size thing.
You know what, just email it to me.
Okay.
Because they're gonna wanna remax it up and.
Remax it up.
Yeah,
I like it. Okay.
yeah, thank you.
And then here's another fun one that we all forget, and I'm guilty of it too, valves. You know, home inspectors should not really be operating valves. So first and foremost, vacant homes, sometimes the seller's tempted, turn the water valve off to the whole house. Well, how do I know if they turn it off because there's a major leak? If I turn that on and I cause a water damage, who are they going to look for to pay for that? So water valves, sometimes there's a basement bar, we forget, we never use it, we turn the water valves off. So try to make sure the valves are on, if they can do that safely, that is. And that goes to gas valves as well. If you can safely turn on the gas valve, here's the one that comes into play. Fireplaces, a gas fireplace. If anyone who has them knows we probably never use them until December. So I turn mine off in the basement. Well, I might forget to turn it back on for the inspector. Well, then the inspector can't inspect that fireplace. And again, we leave an unknown item for the buyer, and that doesn't help them feel any more comfortable. Okay. So that's my little spiel about
Thank you, that's
help
great.
for the listing agents. Okay. Any other items that somebody thinks might be relevant to that, or might be should be
Like the
added?
water heater, I think there was one that somebody left off.
Yeah.
And you can inspect it because it was off.
Of course, you're right. Water heater. They had the gas off to the water heater. Sometimes they do that to the furnace. It's more rare, but sometimes they do turn the fixtures off and the equipment off.
Well, you know, it's funny too, because those of us who went through the foreclosure crisis, we had so many vacant homes that to me, I think, who wouldn't know that? But you guys, you know, you didn't go through that. And you know, when you get all these bank-owned properties, it was constant trying to make sure all the utilities were on and all the valves were on for an inspection. So.
Well, that's a great one. Utilities. I didn't have that on my list, but vacant homes, sometimes they have the electric shut off, the gas shut off, the water shut off. What can I inspect? All right. So enough about that. Sorry, guys. All right. Next is, I just wish more agents would attend the walkthrough if possible. I think it's a great way for the agents to first learn about the home inspection process, learn about different components of the home itself. And really, as a salesperson at heart, I want to spend time with my client and build rapport with them. That's a great opportunity to do that, in my personal opinion. I understand there's reasons why you might not want to attend.
So I'll wait till we talked about the next one, but then I actually am going to do about a 30-second, what would you call that? Acting out of how
Role
to do
play.
that.
I love it. I love it.
30-second role play. So go ahead.
Perfect. And then here's just a friendly tip. I don't mean to step on your toes
No,
for
please
training,
do.
but this is something
Please do.
that I've experienced where a new agent contacted their colleague, another agent that had a home inspection coming up, and they talked to their colleague and said, hey, can I attend your home inspection just as a silent shadow, just so I can see the process, because I don't have any deals under my belt yet. I thought, wow, what a great idea. But again, I don't know, you probably have a great training process. I just think that was a great idea.
We encourage that.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. My last little selfish item is, give the inspector a little feedback sometimes. We all want to improve ourselves. We all want to do our very best. And sometimes when things go really well, we'd like to know it. Sometimes when things don't work so well, let me know so I can make it work better in the future. So I love getting feedback. I love it.
I do
Even if
have to
it's
say, you're really great about receiving
well, thank you.
feedback, good and bad. Well, you know what I mean? Like you take it and you learn from it. I do appreciate that about.
Well, thank you. I'm sending you a high five over there. I really appreciate the
Mhm.
feedback. If it's good, bad, funny, whatever, I love it. So that's my selfish little one.
Well, it's the lenders too. We have to think of these
Mhm.
guys as our partners.
Yes.
And if they don't know, they can't fix it. And what I feel like is I am going to mold you into my perfect home inspector. So
Mhm.
I know what I'm getting and it's working. So absolutely that feedback.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's one item that didn't make my list, but just dawned on me. Have you guys ever seen Facebook posts where someone says, hey, I had a closing today with so-and-so, so thankful, and they thank everybody in their team. And I've never once seen one that had a home inspector listed. So I'm gonna challenge you guys to find one and share it with me in the future. Because my heart breaks a little every time I see this.
Yeah.
And I'm only kidding with you guys, I realize.
Tiny
But
deaths.
yeah, little tiny deaths. And that's really, I'm kind of joking, but I would challenge any person here, if you ever find one of those posts that includes their home inspector, share it with me. I want to have a great sunny day that day. All right. Next topic is another one I love. Lisa said, what do I wish more agents would stop doing or stop saying? And it's a short list, but the number one item on here is code. Using the word code. So is this to code? Is this house up to code? Is this item code compliant? And the reason I'd like to stop saying the word code is because keep in mind, the home inspection is not a code compliance inspection for a lot of reasons. It just so happens that most of our defects in a home inspection also are code compliance defects. But keep in mind also that construction codes update every 3 to 6 years. That's electric code, plumbing code, mechanical code, which is heating and cooling, and general building code. Every 3 to 6 years, all those codes are updating. We do not have to arbitrarily update our house every 3 to 6 years just to come into compliance. As long as it was up to snuff the day it was built, up to code the day it was built. So I would really try to avoid using the word code on a home inspection if I ever can. I never use it.
So then we need a little bit of advice because I'm thinking of a situation where there was a home inspector trashed the electrical system to the point where the buyer was crying. Electrician came in and said, this was all to code when this was built, right? So sometimes when we use the word code, it's because the inspector's saying, and we're going, okay, but is it code? Like, yeah, I get it that you don't like it, but was it up to code? You know, we're
that's what I
trying
was.
to, so tell us what to say.
So that was a good question. Instead of using the word code, what can we say? And I think it might be, was this acceptable during when the date was built and installed?
Okay.
Instead of using code, you use acceptable. Or if they're saying, hey, this looks really bad, is this a code issue? You could also say, is this a serious defect?
Okay.
Or is this a serious concern? You know, I would just try to get away from using the word code, because anytime somebody uses it, I have to go through the thing to say, okay, guys, this is not a code compliant. I have to go through that to cover my own rear end and to make sure the buyer has the correct expectation.
Good.
Does that answer your question, Lisa?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Are there things that, because it was up to code at that time? I mean, do you point those out?
So yeah,
Like,
yeah.
during the inspection, be like, you know, they did it right at the time, but right now, you know, it needs to go.
Great question. I was still in my pocket. You guys know these ground fault circuit interrupters, GFCIs.
My
When-
water.
You got it, wet locations. Now, a lot of our homes in Battle Creek are built in the 1950s and 60s. These really weren't an issue back then. So when I find these in homes that are missing, I always like to tell them, hey guys, you know, when this home was built, GFCIs weren't even invented, or it wasn't a concern. So I'll qualify that not having one is a defect, but also we're going to talk about when this home was built, these weren't required. Okay, so does that kind of answer what you're asking? Yeah. And it's so common. I almost expect to find at least 1 or 2 missing GFCIs on almost every home inspection, okay?
Real fast too. Isn't there also the way in a basement, the way the electrical wires ran, like you're not supposed to like drill through them.
Like the
What
joist?
is-
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Now,
Good question.
Integrity of the
but I
board.
see them, I see it a ton.
So there are, to answer your question, there are, on the floor joist, there are certain locations where you're allowed to drill holes that are a certain diameter. And there are rules and guides for that. I don't know every single rule and guide, but I know there are rule and guides and they exist. There were different methods of installing wiring, 50 years ago compared to today. We've made changes in what we allow, what we don't allow. We've also learned a little bit about compromising the integrity of floor joists and how to not to do that. Is that kind of what you're touching on? Yeah, and there are different construction methods today versus 50 years ago. I'll tell you, some of the homes 50, 60 years ago are built a little stronger than they are today. And I'm underplaying that a little bit.
Some of them have half trees that just.
Right.
Yeah.
You can almost still see the bark on them.
All right. So the word code is one of my number one things I would suggest trying to avoid using and try to find other ways to ask that question. All right. This is a short list. My other item that I wish people would try to stop using or saying is this phrase, and it's personal to home inspectors: deal killers. So I have heard this phrase be thrown out there before, and I try to remind people that, hey, most home inspectors are just trying to do their very best for their client, and they don't consider themselves deal makers, deal breakers. We're just trying to do our best job for our buyer, okay? Now, some inspectors, we're not all created equally, we're all different, but I just try to keep that in the back of your mind. I don't think I've ever met a home inspector who enjoys being the reason a deal fell apart, okay? Usually, we're disappointed that it fell apart, and we're not happy to give that news, but we got to give it to them straight. Anybody want to touch on that one?
I do.
Okay.
We use the word deal killer all the time, not about a home inspector.
Okay.
Matter of fact, that bothers me when somebody calls a home inspector a deal killer. Home inspector can't be a deal killer. Deal killers are deal
Your
killers.
home didn't pass
Yeah,
the inspection.
a sinking foundation is a deal killer. What we do, and I don't think you have this problem. Again, it's the way you deliver, and that's why I said feedback, right? When I first started in real estate, and he's no longer even in the state, he might not even be alive, but Paul Meek was my favorite home inspector. And I'd have to call him and say, Paul, obviously I want you telling the buyer everything they need to hear. But when you say things like, I wouldn't have it, that's not helpful, right? It's the way you present the information. And so I actually had a home inspector who, sorry, I thought I turned that off. I had a home inspector who the furnace was very, very small. The house was very, very small. And he was telling the buyer, and I said, okay, but is it adequate for the size? Well, I wouldn't have it. Well, no shit,
Yeah, I
Sherlock,
don't
you live
care.
in a $20,000 home. Like, I wouldn't have it either, but I don't live in an 800 square foot home. So I agree with you. Home inspectors aren't deal killers. What we need is the presentation, the way you say it, right? Okay, in a normal home, this would be, very common. However, it doesn't make it acceptable. And I totally stick up for you that you are not the deal killer.
Oh, thank you.
But using the word deal killer, we do all the time, but we do it as in, is this a deal killer?
Okay, now I get it.
Yes.
So I guess my little peeve was using it to describe an inspector.
Amen. I agree.
Not necessarily a
No.
condition. A condition
Yes.
could definitely be
Yes.
a deal killer.
Yes.
So that was another one of those tricky questions, and the
Yes.
one I really felt was cool.
Yeah.
Anyone have anything they want to add to that list?
I do have something to add.
Go for it.
It just triggered when I heard Dave say pass. I think the thing with like home inspections is it's not necessarily a pass fail system. And I think educating the buyer, because sometimes we're like, well, when I'm looking through this, does this mean this passes inspection? It's like, well, that's not what we're doing. We're just gathering the information. I was actually on an inspection, not with you, the other day, and for somebody else, and was just chatting with them because I'd never worked with them before. And it's just interesting, right? When you start working with different people and kind of seeing their methods or the language they use or don't use. And I was just asking about, do you have agents who come on these inspections every time. And he was like, oh no, he's like, I've done hundreds of inspections for agents and I've never seen their face or talked to them in person. And I was like, what? Like, I just couldn't even imagine. But that was one of the things that this other agent said, or this buyer had said, was just asking them questions about, well, do you think, does this pass? Is this acceptable? Is this okay? And it was like, oh, hold on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I just think, not thinking in terms of pass, fail, but
Well,
I'm
we
just
do
gathering
appreciate
information.
that some home inspectors will delineate between high risk or
Right.
what is your delineation of safety issues versus,
Good question. To back up just a second, I always like to follow and set the expectation with the buyer as soon as we arrive for the walkthrough. So I do my inspection work first, then the buyer arrives and review everything I found. We do a really detailed walkthrough, but I like to set the expectation. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, no home is perfect. I've never inspected a perfect home. My own home, new construction home, no home is perfect. And there's no such thing as pass or fail. So we're going to talk about some things that we could improve. 99% of the things, guys, you guys know this, 99% of the defects in a home inspection are minor. Very rare do we come across those deal killer defects, okay? But to answer your question, my report is designed to show items that are noted just as a note, maybe not perfect, but not necessarily rising to the level of what we call a material defect, defined as an item, system, or component that is going to pose a major detriment to the value of the home, a major safety risk, or things of that nature. So we have
what do you call it? A
material defects.
material defect.
So the defects or the material defects will be listed as repair, replace with, very clear description of them. There's no gauge of, this, if there's a life and safety risk, like maybe a furnace venting into the living space, that will be certainly noted separately.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So those are the things I was hoping people might stop doing or saying. Very short list. All right. Next topic was, why should agents attend the home inspection? I touched on this. Lisa, did you have something you wanted to add to this? I thought you said.
Yeah, the biggest reason to attend the home inspection is that secondhand information is very hard to pass on. If you're there and you see it, and now you're talking to the other agent because there's a repair addendum, again, I'm not a home inspector, call Christian, ask him, but you were there, you saw it, listen, this is going on, this is a major concern, the buyer, whatever. It's very hard to advocate for your buyer if you don't know what you're talking about. So just being there and seeing it yourself, hearing what Christian has to say about it is that the other reason is, again, not everyone is like Christian and gives that little speech. You're there to be that calm buffer. When I could point out 30 things in this room of concern, right? 30 things. By the time I'm done, you're like,
Get out of here.
forget it. We'll just move on. You need to be there to just be like, yep, okay, well, that's pretty typical, correct? Yep, that's pretty typical. Okay, great, let's move on. And, it's just that calm presence, because if they've never done one of these before, it's overwhelming.
And we have the relationship with the client, and so we can read their expressions. I've been on home inspections where, when I'm listening, I know, like, okay, not a big deal, but then I look at their face and they're like deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
And so I can step in and sort of buffer that
Yeah.
situation.
Ask
You know
for
what I
more
mean?
clarification.
Or ask
And
for
get
more
clarification and whatever.
Exactly.
We all are humans, and when we hear something that we don't understand, we tend to fear the worst. So sometimes it just takes a little bit more explaining of a defect,
Right.
so that person can say, oh, okay, now I get it. Gosh, it wasn't that bad.
Right.
So that's helpful. Those cues from the agents who know the buyer.
So this actually, this had to do kind of with a well-in subject. I had a client, thank God she was one of my good friends, because it would have been terrible if I wasn't super close with them. But they let her know, oh my gosh, your bladder tank, like, it is about to explode, like shoot up through your house, which it's right below her son's room. And she's like, what? So she calls me and I was just like, well, let me call them real fast. So I called and I was like, what's going on with this? And he's like, yeah, I mean, it's serious down there. And I was like, well, did you have to tell her it was gonna shoot through her son's? Like, if something happens to this, we ended up laughing like crazy about it. And because I was just like, I've never had this happen. But this was absolutely the worst inspection I've ever had in my entire life.
How colorful. Okay. Well, every inspector is different. You guys may already know this, but there is no licensing, certifications, any requirements for home inspectors in Michigan. So anybody can inspect homes. We all have different processes typically. The way I go through the home, we go one system at a time. We're going to talk about the defects. We're also going to talk about the positive things. And a lot of times, and you guys know this, when there's a positive thing for that system, what happens at the end of the system? High five. We got to celebrate the small wins, right, guys? So, but every inspector is different. All right, we're running a little shorter on time, if that's okay. If we're going to, any other questions about that before we move on to the next topic? All right, so let's discuss confidentiality and the home inspector's agreement. And most home inspectors are going to have a written agreement. On my agreement, there is a section that's a required field. It's all electronic. They do it electronically. It's a DocuSign agreement, and the buyer is required to tell me if they want me to share things with their agent. 99.9, almost every single time, they'll say yes. Once in a great while, they'll leave it blank or they'll put my name there, and then I'll have to clarify. But if they don't give me permission to share their inspection report with their agent or answer their agent's question about their inspection, I have to honor their wishes. I can't remember the last time it's happened. It's been years since that's ever happened. But I always like people to know I can't share anything with their agent unless they give me permission. They're my client. I have a fiduciary responsibility to them. And this is especially true for sellers or listing agents, because this happens often. The listing agent will call me and say, how did things go? And I always give a polite, general, things always go well. I can't give them specific information with a few exceptions. If there is a life safety risk or concern, if I notice the furnace is venting into the basement or the water heater has no vent attached, this has happened, I always want to let that listing agent know, hey guys, there's a safety concern, just wanted you to be aware of it. Or if there was a water leak during the inspection and water accumulation, of course I'm going to try to clean it up, but it's going to keep leaking until that drain pipe's empty. I let them know so they can mitigate their damages. If I can't lock the property up or something like that, I have to let them know. Other than that, I can't share anything with the listing agent. So if it's your listing, don't be heartbroken when I say just a general response, okay? You guys probably know that, but we thought that was important to mention. Any questions on that?
I just a comment, which means as a buyer's agent, you can't share that home inspection with the seller's agent without the buyer's permission. Buyer pays for that, they own that. It's not yours to distribute. So again, you need to navigate that carefully. I've had it before where we've terminated and the seller wants to know if they can have the home inspection. And what I'll usually say to the buyer is, you paid
$445.
You paid $445 for that. Sell it to them. Get that to them for $200. You'll give it to them. Or I'll say to the buyer, yeah, you'll share it with them when they sign the termination and give you, just be careful. It's not for you to distribute either. Okay.
Very good point, actually.
So when you're negotiating like repairs or whatever, I usually, like, if I'm the buyer's agent, I have listing agents that say, could you send me that portion of it so I know what you're talking about?
You should
that
let the
legal?
buyer know that you're doing that,
Okay.
right? You should say, I'm gonna include just that part of it and just that part. I'm gonna include just that part of the home inspection with it, so they can see exactly what the home inspector said. But the buyer should know that, because really, that's not yours to distribute.
Do you ever, say you did an inspection on a house and deal falls through for a discounted fee? Would you
Share that with.
switch it over, meet them there, go through the inspection that you've already done?
Very good question. And this does come up very often, more often than you might think. Just happened this week again, actually. I'll be inspecting that house on Monday. So the answer to that question is never, ever, ever do I do that. And there's good reasons why. When I do an inspection, I have a duty to that person who hired me first and foremost, and it's confidential. I cannot share that with anybody. Secondly, after that deal is terminated, the seller may have made repairs. Those conditions in that home quite often change. Now I'm telling a new buyer, here's the conditions of the home. I don't know anything that's been repaired or changed. So it's really not, I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to do that.
Right.
And I explained the reasons why. And if that, let's just pretend that the new buyer maybe is strapped for cash. Hey, maybe I'll suggest to their agent, contact the past buyer. Maybe they'll share it with you. You know, I just won't get involved in that because it adds too much liability to me.
Right.
Okay. That's just my personal beliefs. But anyhow, good question. Though. I'm really glad you asked that. You guys ready for the last section? And this is
Okay, so really quick, how much time do we have?
11:07.
Oh, shoot. I really wanted to do a quick.
Let's do that.
Okay, I'm just
Let's
gonna do
that.
it really quick because
I'm in a
I
rush.
think it's important. You're in a rush.
I'm in a
Oh,
rush.
okay, all right, okay, so I'm saying to the buyer, he's gonna get there about 9. He's gonna be done about 11, so how about you get, and you're gonna tell me, but
Mhm.
how about you show up at 11? I'll be there and you're welcome to go to the whole thing if you want. It's just very hard for him to get things done if you're there the whole time. And don't worry, he's gonna show you everything he found. So you come at 11 and he's gonna walk you through. I'm gonna show up at 10:45. And I'm gonna like, hey Christian, how's it going? Good to see
Great to
you.
see you,
Yeah,
Lisa.
yeah, how'd it go overall?
You have my
Everything
clipboard.
good? How's it coming?
We had a great inspection today.
Good.
Here are a few highlights.
Okay.
And let's just talk about the 5 major systems first. So
No,
foundation.
hold on. You're gonna do that with the buyer. It's
Yep.
just me right now.
I'm giving you just a few highlights.
Yeah, nope, don't want it. I'm gonna say, did we find anything huge? Right? And
Okay.
you're either gonna say, there are some things that no, Lisa, I don't think there's gonna be any huge surprises, or you're going to say,
Here are a few things
We're
that stood out.
scanning it.
yeah,
Okay, and
Yeah.
Just A, B, and C.
okay, great. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Buyer shows up, right? He doesn't have to give his speech because I'm gonna give it, right? I'm heading him off of that. Hey, come on in. This is Christian. Hey, just want to remind you. What we're here today and what his job is to look at this entire house. He's gonna show you absolutely everything. If we were inspecting a brand new home, he'd have a long list of things to show you. That is normal. We are not here to look for dings in the wall or, small things, but it's his job to point those all out to you. We're gonna look at those and we wanna know those, and those will be very important to you as a homeowner, because what you're gonna do is also get a little bit of class on welcome to your home. But as far as the home inspection, what we're looking for are major items that are either of concern or of an expense that we can't find ourselves in looking for a house, that had you known about those things, you may not have made the offer that you made. I want to let you know that what Christian's telling you today is confidential. So if you want me to be in on this and you want me to be able to help you, the first thing you need to do is let him know that's okay. Yep, that's okay. Great. Okay. The other thing you need to know is you've got a couple of days to decide what you want to do. So we're going to go through with Christian. He's going to give you a written or electronic report. I want you to take that home and go through it. But by this date at this time, and I know when that date and time is, we either need to be ready to move forward, or I need to have in writing a list of things that you're finding unacceptable. Sound good? Good. Anything else? Nope. Great. And then I give it to him. And then he says all the things, and he takes them here and he takes them there and he takes them there. And if I see them going, I say, okay, Christian, is this a major concern? Is this a safety issue? Is this normal? Give us a little bit more. I'm exactly what Olivia said. If they seem like they're not getting it or getting panicky, that's my job to see that and slow things down, ask them to spend a little bit more time on it, right? Okay, all right.
I would have given you a high five.
Uh-huh.
That's a good prep.
I feel like that really goes both ways though, because I had some really big things come up on inspection yesterday or on Tuesday, and I mean like furnace venting,
Yeah.
nowhere, chimney falling down, and she's like, everything's going so well, and I'm like, miscommunicating.
Like,
So I had to like do that on the opposite side, like
Wow,
this is a big deal.
See,
Yeah.
wow.
Like carbon monoxide everywhere. Yeah.
Well, and thank you. We do need them and expect them to say, stop.
Mhm.
This isn't work. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, furnaces venting into the basement, people could die.
Mhm.
We need him to say, okay, guys. You know, that's
Rules of
important.
this is
Yeah,
serious.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
So really, guys, that was everything except those items in a basement that people ask, hey, what's this, what's that? You guys want to talk about that next?
Do you have pictures?
I do,
Awesome,
Yeah.
because,
and they're labeled.
awesome. Because most of these guys do know what's the furnace, what's up, but there are things like sump pumps and.
There's two in here that I want to touch on because you asked
Good.
about them.
Thank you.
So if you look at the third from last page, bye Sue, you'll see common components. So row 2, the top photo says furnace. It's the side of a furnace. You see the white piping, the thinner piping around the bottom. That's the condensate tubing. Lisa asked about that. So that's one item I wanted to point out.
And there's condensate tubing because,
All high efficiency furnaces and all central air conditioner systems produce a tremendous amount of condensation, a lot of water. We got to handle that water. We got to pump it up to the, pump it out.
Mhm.
is there something on the furnace that tells you that central air is hooked up?
Yes. On the first photo that says furnace, if you look really close above that U-shaped pipe, you're going to see a black set of pipes coming down at an angle.
Mhm.
Those are the refrigeration lines. So those are the air conditioner. It's usually a black foam wrapped copper line. Okay. That will tell you there's an air conditioner evaporator coil above the furnace. Also outside on the right photo, top right, that's the air conditioner condenser. You'll see that outside usually. It's always there. You just might not always see it. Might be covered with vegetation. Okay. The next fun thing I thought would be interesting is the basement dry system.
Mhm.
The bottom middle photo, that's the components that you might not be able to identify. So flip to the next page, basement dry system. If a home has a basement dry system, here are some telltale signs. First and foremost, around the perimeter on the basement slab, you'll usually see where they had to cut the concrete and replace it. So you'll see new concrete around the perimeter. You'll also almost always be able to see the sump pump. Sometimes it's covered, but if there's always a sump pump component. A hole. Yep, a hole. So you usually see the sump pump. That's in the corner here. And then the third thing you'll see along that cut new concrete, there's a little 3 inches of plastic sticking up. It's a little bit of a gray color in front of the white. That is a plastic component that's part of a basement dry system.
Real quick with those, basements that have that, do they tend to have the higher, radon levels?
It's possible, but they're not supposed to, but in reality, they usually,
Because it gives it a way to see.
well, yeah, they're
from
supposed,
underneath.
when they cut that perimeter of the slab, they're supposed to reinstall what they call a vapor barrier, a heavy plastic to prevent radon from coming up. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So there's a chance it could have higher radon.
So there's a quote in a movie School of Rock where it says, I'm hungover. Do you know what that means? And I said, it means you've been drinking. He says, no, it means I was drinking tonight. When you see a termite system, it doesn't mean they have termites. It means they had termites before.
Yeah.
When you see a bee dry system, it doesn't mean you have a wet basement. It means you had a wet base. So we have to be careful that bee dry systems aren't. It actually means there was a wet basement and it was mitigated.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
I think the opposite. They spent a tremendous amount of money to install that
To
system
have
to
a dry
protect their
basement.
basement.
Yes. Yes.
They're not cheap.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right. I don't want to take up any more time than you guys are willing to give, but do anybody have any questions?
I do have a question about the inspection I had yesterday. So I, of course, asked them to do X, Y, and Z, revent it, fix the chimney, blah, blah, blah. And they came back and said, we'll put a new furnace in, a high efficiency one, vented out the side. Cool. What are you gonna do about the chimney? Because in my mind, like I was up in the attic, those bricks are literally falling down. And so I'm like, I mean, I will call that inspector later, but like if that chimney falls, won't that be like a hole? Like, and what can we look for like in a chimney when we're in a house? Because I see chimneys all the time and I'm don't
Good
know what I'm
question.
looking at.
So you can look for deteriorated joints between the bricks. Keep in mind, in the attic, the chimney will never look as good as it does outside in the
Okay.
basement. It's designed that way. They're usually off center
Yeah,
too. They're usually crooked. That's just how they line them up. So in the attic, it could be deceiving. It could look worse than it really is.
Okay.
So the joints are not tooled as nicely as they are outside the show.
Now, deterioration in the mortar and the joints of a chimney can lead to the chimney crumbling over time, and chimneys were for venting. So if you're no longer venting a furnace or a water heater or anything through the chimney, you can abandon the chimney,
Okay.
but you do then have a hole in your roof. Do you remove the chimney and cover the hole?
So abandon the chimney, you can leave it in place if it's in good condition. You could remove the chimney, which would mean you'd have a roof repair.
Yeah.
If it's in good condition, I would recommend just abandoning it and leaving it in place.
But it might need.
But
If
these
it-
bricks,
if it-
yeah. like
What do you
those
call
bricks
that?
are
Is it
like-
tuck pointing?
Tuck pointing, repair, masonry repair. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would have maybe a brick specialist look at that. It doesn't have to be a structural, it can just be any brick mason. They may be able to repair it and make it strong enough so that it's not a concern.
Like just can stay
Last time
there.
I needed a brick mason, I called Bosco Brick and they gave me 3 names.
Awesome advice.
I have chimney inspector.
Yeah.
That'd be perfect.
I stole
Send
it.
me all
You
your
did
chimneys.
steal
He's the
mine.
best.
You
He
did
is the
steal
best
mine.
I've ever worked with.
That would be fantastic.
All
It's
right.
also an Albion, so I don't know if I'll go that far. I'll call.
What other questions are there?
Awesome.
Fantastic. I had a great time talking with you guys.
Oh,
I
one
see
more
some new
question.
faces.
Do you do home inspections? Like if anyone has already bought a home and is like, hey, I waived my home inspection a year ago, I would love to have one, just so I know what's going on.
Did 2 last week. It's
Oh,
happening a
okay.
lot more now than it has ever in the
Cool.
past.
Cool, yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Uh,
Yeah.